All right, welcome everyone to another episode of 123 Chess, the place where we review, analyze, and improve. My name is Luke.
I'm Tom.
And we're here today for, you guessed it, our analysis of Game 3. And so since Tom was playing as white, Tom, would you like to kick it off today?
Yeah, so just going to fly through the first few moves here because this is what we saw in the last video. We got to here, which took me a little while to get going, but around here we're following I'm following a pretty typical play pattern. And this right here was the first move that I really started to look at because when we were playing the game, I did notice after I committed to this move, before Luke had done his next move, I was like, oh, you know what? I could have just pushed my F-pawn forward. And so I wanted to take a look at what would have happened had I done that. So last video, when I had mentioned that to Luke, we had both kind of said, you know, the most likely move we thought he would have done is back up his bishop, which the engine recognized as being a good move. Now, from here, the big question for me is where do I proceed from here? Because now I'm at this point of forming some sort of an attack, and the first things that my mind immediately went to, and this was kind of the general theme that I kept referring to in our last video, was my plan was to walk this e-pawn forward with the assistance of this f-pawn. And then, you know, usually my plan is to bring my rook onto e1 so it can support that attack. You know, it's in a position right now where it could potentially pin the queen. So all that being said, the first move that I had kind of thought about was, okay, well, what if I just launch that pawn forward right away? The problem is it's not very supported. It's a really, like, it's kind of a weak move. And computer really doesn't recommend it. And then I thought, okay, well, you know, my other plan, right? Get that rook into the action. No, didn't like that either. I mean, that one was okay, but it's not what the computer wanted. So looking at what the computer wanted, looking at what the computer suggested was, boom, take. And that one, and this was me screwing up as a player and overthinking these double pawns, because I kept looking at those double pawns. I wasn't considering that as a move because I thought, well, I don't want Luke to just take that back. Well, why was this thing such a big deal? Why was getting this line such a big deal? Luke had yet to castle, and he had put his queen on the e7 square, and I was just being oblivious to the fact that if he did that, then I'm opening myself up for moving rook to e1, pinning his queen to his king. And that would have been a great way to get a queen for a rook.
And you know what's funny is the whole doubled pawns thing. That threw me off too. Like, I was focusing too much on the doubled pawns thing as well. It's so funny how it's a beginner principle that you don't want to have double pawns. We both realized that, but I just find it interesting how both of us got hung up on that.
Too hung up on those doubled pawns. So I really just left it at that because I felt like that was the move that I really could have capitalized on. I mean, Luke would not have he wouldn't have recaptured right after I took that. He wouldn't have recaptured because he would have seen, like, oh shoot, he can move his rook over and that's going to be problematic for me. But at this point in time, and you know, I actually didn't break apart as to what the best move was. I think at this point it's actually castling. But that's still even problematic because now I still get to clean up a second pawn.
Yep.
So I've gained 2 pawns because of the mistake that he made, you know, not castling at that point in time. And that's very much a winning position for white. That, I mean, you know, he doesn't even have a pawn in this that file or that file.
Yep.
This is or this one now. So he just has that one isolated pawn. And so that would have been a great one.
Totally.
So the first one that I looked at. But what ended up happening was I actually had moved my my queen to here on that move. Then we got this little exchange, and I moved my knight to A4. And it's really interesting because the chess engine actually says moving the knight to A4 was a missed win.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, so that one was really interesting, and that's the move that was suggested, which we had kind of briefly touched on in our last video. That was such a great spot because now this knight is pinned to this queen. So I just kind of explored, like, okay, what's the best line of play there? And these are all recommended moves, yeah. But that, you know, that breaks up the pin, which seems good. But it also, you know, kind of reverses it and puts pressure on the bishop, which is obviously still protected by this queen. So it's not an immediate danger. But it also prevents me from taking that knight and forcing him to recapture with the pawn, because it still leaves the recapture with the queen as an opportunity. Well, from there, though,
ouch.
Now you can take that pawn yet again. And again, this was a consistent thing of not seeing that pawn capture as a legitimate move, because I just kept telling myself, well, if I do that, then he's just going to retake with the pawn. But once again, I'm in the same position of, well, doing that is a revealed attack, and it opens up that attack on the queen yet again. So he has to move his queen at this point. He can't recapture with the queen on that pawn because I'd still have it defended. So instead, queen's got to move. This is a very logical place to go because it is threatening a pretty nasty attack right there. So from here, I need to address that again. And I said, you know, bring the bishop down. Now I've got the two centralized bishops right there. And again, now he's bouncing queen just all over the place, right? So at this point, we've forced a series of queen moves, which is pretty neat. And in the process, I've picked up two pawns, which is just a really cool attack. And I mean, again, just material-wise, picked up the material and the position of these pieces. You know, this forward pawn aside, we still have these nice pieces right here down attacking the middle. So that's what I had explored there. But again, that same sort of theme, which was kind of key takeaway, was not worrying so much about attacking into a pawn structure that has those doubled pawns and allowing him to break them up, which is really funny. It's funny that that was kind of a key takeaway for me, because I actually had been thinking just that when I moved the knight move, because I was saying, you know, I'm okay with him moving the bishop there, and I could recapture, which I actually didn't look at in the analysis. I probably should have, which he would have retaken with that pawn. But my goal in that was to clear that path so I could move that pawn forward. So it was just interesting that I was okay with the attack that I had planned with breaking up that pawn structure, but for some reason in my head, this attack like just wouldn't register because it was like, oh well, if I do that attack, he gets to break up that pawn structure that I've worked to create. So yeah. So
And
that,
then the sheer force of you unlocking your white bishop toward my king is, I mean, regardless of if the pawn goes to e5 or d5, either way, that's pretty, that in and of itself is almost worth it.
yeah, absolutely. So this is the way that the game actually proceeded. We saw these takes. I do move that pawn forward. I move my king to the side. Now, this one was not one that I had originally planned on breaking apart because this was just a blunder on my part that wasn't capitalized on by Luke. So I originally was kind of ignoring this, but I did think, well, you know, realistically, that's what I'm going to see more often than not in this position. So I shouldn't make that move just in general. So I said, what would have been a better move? And this is what the engine was recommending, which actually serves to accomplish the same sort of goal that I was looking to do. Right? It was to get that queen out of that line, which was attacking the king. Now, the reason why this wasn't an obvious choice for me was because the queen could just bounce right back there. Now, I believe when I looked at this on the computer, the engine actually recommended the queen go here.
Yeah, moving back.
Yep. But you know, that's not what I was afraid of. I was really afraid of that queen backing up. So I said, okay, let's say, you know, let my worst fears come true. Let that move back there. And what do I have as options? Now, computer recommends this. This is wild. Okay.
Yeah, I would not have thought of that.
I would not have thought of that. And honestly, Luke, I don't think it's reasonable, but I actually do want to explore this one just to highlight like the problem of computer analyses.
I like this. This is good.
Yeah, because it goes real deep here. Because this looks like a bad move to me. Okay. This proceeds with a capture, obviously, and a recapture by the queen. So that looks okay. But you know, my question from here is like, well, where do you go now? So I was just looking for the computer to give me some, because from here I would be clueless. So full disclosure, every single move here was just this is computer recommended moves. I want you to see how far this gets before it actually turns into something that resembles like a winning position for white. So, you know, pawn moves forward because white is threatening checkmate by moving the queen forward, that one square, right? So got to do something to prevent that.
En passant.
Yep, you got it. And then from there we've got the knight recaptures, which is now protecting that pawn, preventing that checkmate from happening. And then from here, I've got a couple of lines in here that look to be in here. Oh, this was actually the recommended move instead of recapturing right away.
What?
But I just thought that was way too wild. Okay? That's why I skipped it. I thought this one was way too wild. But if you look at where this goes, right?
Oh, I see.
So this goes recapture, and then recapture, forking the queen with the king.
Crazy stuff.
You get a recapture. But again, from here, right? This was all initiated by that white move, that sacrificed bishop. I mean, I guess at this point, material-wise, white is up. But Yeah, this was just so much to be able to see, right? So that was that line of play that was being recommended, right? And it all follows this move. So from here, we're seeing a capture, move, en passant. Sorry, not a capture there, but a capture there,
That
right?
is so messed up.
Yeah, super messed up.
You can't tell me even like a human grandmaster would have recommended this. Like, I would doubt
No,
it, you
no,
know?
a human grandma. This is not the kind of line of play that you will see in Grandmaster games. So anyway, again, this would have been a big no-no, a big red flag. I certainly wouldn't have done this line of attack, because no human would. A machine is like, yeah, that's brilliant. Um,
I
uh,
think that does really well highlight too, like you said, the whole dynamic of, the chess.com like we use, it'll thrust the engine analysis right in front of you when you're done. You're like, oh great, I can just see what I did wrong and what should I have done. And then one of the moves it says is the best one is one like this, and you're like, how am I ever gonna know those?
yeah,
How you gonna learn from that?
but this pawn move still is reasonable.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
pawn move still is reasonable, and that is likely what would happen. And so then I said, okay, I'm not going to do that move. There's no way I'm ever going to do that move. But what is a move that I would do in this position?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? That's really a very reasonable move. Queen can't go here, here, or here. So Queen's just got to back up. And now, now I'm in a position where, again, I've got those bishops that are forward. I'm probably going to want to move this bishop this turn, or perhaps do what I, was planning this entire time, defending that pawn. And that was really what I was trying to accomplish by, moving my king over in the first place. Freeing up the ability to move that pawn forward. But that was in a much more protected way that made a lot more sense.
It's crazy too, because you basically just took over the queen side, like preventing any option of me trying to gain space there, while at the same time further empowering your king side potential. So
Yeah.
it's pretty brutal. I like it.
So let's see here. Game proceeded. And this was the move that I did, and this is the move that was really the turning point in the game for me. Definitely a blunder on my part. It was met by a capture here, which I wasn't ready for. And the obvious move that we discussed last week was me just pushing my pawn forward, which is what I had set myself up to do anyway. And if you're looking for an explanation for why didn't I do that, I'll reference the last video. Check that out if you haven't yet. But yeah, I should have done that. So what would our line of play look like had that happened? Knight's going to move. Moving someplace, probably not going to go to the back row. That's probably the most reasonable choice. And then from here, this was interesting because the move that I first explored was actually launching that pawn forward. And I think that's what Luke and I had actually discussed in the previous video would make sense. And I don't think that it's unreasonable, though the chess engine does say it is technically a mistake. It's an error.
Huh.
And this is what it's calling for.
That makes sense, I guess, because you got the
Yeah,
bishop,
if you
the
look at
battery.
it, I mean, it does make sense. You got a lot of weight bearing down on that attack. At which point in time, Black has to do something about it. So this is just kind of a continuation of what that could look like based on the best moves the end is recommending. And that's cleaned up, but then we get a little bit of a counterattack happening. Queen ends up there. Pushes bishop away. And then I stopped the analysis here because this is the point where the king actually does move up onto that square, and it kind of highlighted the order of operations, which we've kind of mentioned in the past. You know, I had moved my king there with the kind of the goal of, well, I want to get my king on the dark square because Luke only has his light squared bishop now, and so my king is going to be a little bit safer on the dark square. But really, there was nothing threatening the king at the time when I moved it. So regardless of you know, just my missed analyses of Luke being able to capture this pawn, regardless of missing that, even if that wasn't a favorable exchange for him, I still had built up this really nice attack, and my king was fine. My king was not being threatened, and so when I did that, I really gave up my tempo that I was really building on throughout the game, and gave Luke the opportunity to seize that momentum. Yeah, and then, you know, from there, and this isn't one that I really looked at because we had talked about from this point in time, just kind of calming myself and you know, doing something like that to bump the knight and then recapturing the pawn and having that line go down the center again, and just kind of like reforming that attack from a little bit of a weaker position, but it still would have been reasonable to do. But yeah, that was kind of what I looked at. You know, my big takeaways were really it was making sure to not overlook a capture, because I'm giving from an immediate perspective a more favorable pawn structure. One of the bits of advice that I've heard from Benjamin Feingold, who is a grandmaster on YouTube. If you haven't checked him out, I highly recommend him.
I recommend him too. He's great.
But one of the things that he says is always look at checks and captures, and that was a capture right there. That you know, that first one that we that I looked at, this pawn capture, which is the one that I missed several times, and I missed it because I just completely dismissed it as, okay, well, he's just gonna, you know, break up that pawn structure, without looking at, like, well, what if he actually did that? Okay, if he actually did that in this move, is that the right move? I mean, sure, it gets him a more favorable pawn structure, but, you know, if I had thought about that for a minute in this position, then, you know, oops, this here becomes like just duh. That becomes a very obvious move to seize that opportunity, which would have been a crippling attack that I avoided, I overlooked. So that was my big takeaway there, probably more than anything else throughout this game. And then you know, seizing the initiative when I have it. Don't drop it to make a defensive move just for the sake of making a defensive move when nothing is being attacked.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Well, for mine, we'll go ahead and flip the board here. And
I got flip.
okay. Awesome. All right. So let's start with let's go back. I had a couple that were really similar to some of Tom's in their placement, but all right, here we are with the 4-knight Scotch variation, pretty much the main line. Okay, so as I put in my analysis, this is the first moment of the game that I was outside of my opening book knowledge, which I didn't know much about this variation, but what I did know ended here. So right here, let's look at what we have going on. Well, obviously Tom has released the pin that I had on his knight. And additionally, there's this pawn that's just chilling in the middle. So if we look at everything on the board at this moment, this pawn is the weakest point of the board. It's the only thing in the center, and it has nothing guarding it except for the knight. So what I was thinking, and referring back to our previous video, is I was like, I have to get enough pieces to attack that so I can take that pawn and open up the center. But what I did next, which was moving my queen, which is a valid, it's a solid option. But there's one key element that this is kind of something I discovered both with learning from my own thought processes, my own style, kind of a combination between that, also reviewing this opening on some masters and what they had to say about the variation. I couldn't find much. I don't know if you could, Tom, but the issue here was when you move the dark square bishop instead of the light square, there aren't many games with this. And so even, in different chess engines and things, like, you didn't really have much theory to go with. So I had to kind of go with a combination of things. But anyway, long story short, what I decided
I want to touch on that because
yeah,
just so what it's clear what Luke is talking about here. The engine does actually recommend that
yes.
as being the preferred move. Now, I shied away from that. The reason I like that is because you can get that, and now all of a sudden I've doubled his pawns, and those are the two open files. They're doubled isolated pawns, and that didn't seem good to me. So I couldn't even tell you why that is the preferred line. I liked the direction that I ended up going, and would play it in the future. But
and per your point, that move isn't a blunder. That's not I don't even think that's an inaccuracy. It's just not the quote unquote best, aka main line move. But that very element alone is needing to be remembered in my mind for the future because of this. If you look, going back to what I was saying, what did I do in response? I moved my queen. So my idea is I have a queen attacking it, I have my knight still attacking it, and then the one defender is now can be taken. So with this in mind, a few moves later, I decided to push my d pawn. So then I had 3 pieces attacking it. The problem is that let's just kind of go a few moves later before I kind of come full circle back this. So I push my pawn, and just like Tom, in a different fashion, I was so hung up on the on the doubled pawn dynamic that I'm attacking it with 3 pieces, right? This whole time, keep in mind, this whole time, here we go. And it's funny because I never take it. I never take it. In fact, I let it get all the way to here where now he has an X-ray on my queen. Yeah, I've castled kind of last minute, but this is just not addressing what needs to be addressed. And it's not that the pushing of the D pawn in and of itself is not wrong, but the fact that I didn't actually pursue what I started is the problem. So let's come back to where I was before. And right at this moment, when I'm making the decision on what piece to use and how to maneuver my pieces to get some more pressure on this pawn, another option I could have pursued is simply, instead of moving my queen there, I could have simply castled. I mean, wow, what a novel concept. It's another simple move. There's nothing too crazy about that, except for what does it do? Instantly, if he decides that he's going to push it, now all of a sudden we have a really powerful dynamic. So that alone now, but one last thing I'll say on this moment. As soon as he moved this bishop instead of the main line, this bishop, as Tom mentioned, which I believe if it was me, I probably would have moved that bishop too, and I probably still would in the future. But what's going on? Let's do simple counting. Okay, 1 move, 2 moves, and 3 moves for him to have a rook on the e file. And well, let's look at mine. 1 move, well, if I have to move it, but the point is 1 move, 2 moves. So right there we see that I'm way ahead just because he didn't open up his king side for the castle. Now that gives me 1 extra tempo to work with here. So if I'm going to castle, now is an ideal time for it. So again, this is not to say that me choosing to move my queen was not, you know, a wise route, but the problem is I didn't really do anything with it, and it's dangerous to have her just chilling there if I'm not going to take action. So in the future, if I encounter this position again, I think probably wisest just to play it safe, because knowing the issues I had were always on the e file the whole game really. So if I just do that, and then the next move Tom's probably going to play is here, because that's, I mean, why not? And then, you know, sure, he can have this pin on my queen, but really what's that threat mean? I mean, it's this pawn really can't do much. He hasn't castled yet, so he's going to castle right away, and then we're going to get, you know, we're going to get a good game. But I just wanted to point out the fact that simple calculation, you know, because if your opponent places the, you know, another queen side piece out in development instead of the king side, and you're especially playing as black, and you already have enough to development to get your castled first, why not? I mean, you're going to have to do it sooner or later. Why not do it right now? So that was my first critical moment. Then as we move forward, and just real quickly here, as when I moved my bishop out here, when Tom, that move Tom mentioned when he ended up pinning and chasing my queen all around here, that happened because when I kicked his queen from its position, he got a better position with it. So that just goes to show you, you don't, just because you can attack a bigger piece doesn't mean you should. And in my case, that was a very, very unprecedented move. So this is my next critical moment. So this is the point where there are 2 main threats for me. The same one that's been occurring for, you know, the whole game basically, where my queen is still chilling there. And the threat would be if he took this pawn, then all of a sudden it opens this up. Then now a new threat where his knight is ready to take my bishop. So with that in mind, I'll let you viewers think about which of these 2 threats is the worst threat. Which is the bigger threat, folks? Obviously this one, because my queen is a bigger piece than the bishop. And by the way, let's just be crazy now and say, you know, let's just do some in between move here. Let's say Tom takes this. Well, guess what? Guess what, folks? Now my queen's not on that file anymore. It actually helped me in a similar sense that I mentioned his queen moving earlier. So with that in mind, what I should have focused on at this point is, how can I address this threat? I haven't addressed it thus far. I've gotten an F so far on this. So now I have a chance to at least get a C or a B minus. So let's see what I can do here. Well, what's obvious? The thing that Tom and I don't want to do, we don't like to have double pawns.
No double pawns!
And yet I tell you what, I've looked at some Grandmaster games on this opening, and a lot of times black ends with doubled pawns and actually can do quite well, amazingly enough, because it's a very open game. And it's not the end. I need to mention too, the whole doubled pawns thing is ultimately for the end game that purpose is most potent. And so if you're not even in the end game yet, it's not as immediate of a threat as if you are. So going back to here, why don't I explore if I just took it instead of, so he, again, if let's get rid of that move. So after he moves there, I take it. Okay, so this directly addresses this threat. And now guess what? He can attack it, but I have 2 pieces defending it. So Tom, what do you want to play? Just pick a move.
Oh man, yeah, because I can't just capture with my bishop. So And yeah, and I think this is something that I had pointed out in my analysis. I think that from here I would have probably gone knight takes c5.
Yep. Yep. All right, so let's do that because that would be probably what I would have done too. But I do want to point out that because this is really helpful for me, I learned a lot in this position because the mere element that I was directly addressing the bigger of the two threats complicated the position for my opponent a lot. I mean, who wants to be white here? Like, it's really hard. You have to be really careful in how you're calculating. Sure, I have a pin, you know, that's, or basically a pin from his rook to my queen, but boy, it's really complex for white now. You have to be careful in your calculations or you'll make a mistake.
Well,
So,
and admittedly too, Luke, when I first did that move, I was overlooking that pawn capture when I moved my knight. And before I noticed that capture of the bishop, I thought to myself, "Oh shoot, I think I made a mistake because now he can just take it because I removed one of my defenders from the piece by moving my knight there."
mm-hmm.
I then, you know, in my recording, I end up saying, "Oh, you know what? I can get my defender back though by capturing that bishop." But it's still not. It's not nearly as much pressure as I had in the previous position.
Yeah. So, and this, I do want to point out too that even though I saw this, you know, after reflecting on it more, the computer did say this was my best move. So, surprise, surprise. I just want to point out I found this before I hit the chess engine because I was going with the logic I just described to you. There's two threats. I'm directly addressing the bigger of the two threats. It's in the center. Let's address that first and eliminate and simplify it for me and make it more complicated for my opponent. And so indeed, that's the best. So again, if Tom was to take this, take, 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 take. All right. Now, okay, it's a lot simpler to work with. And yes, I do have this bishop here, but look, hey, now I can attack this, and now I got two pieces going right here. You know, there's a lot that can be done here. He can't bring his rook here because of that. I mean, sure, he could bring his bishop. Anyway, the point is, it's an open game. It's a solid game. Yes, I have doubled pawns, but let's get it going. That's kind of what I should have done. So huge takeaways from that, by the way, huge takeaways. All right, so now let's go to my next. So, and again, this is what I did, which just pitiful. I mean, he just gained some space for himself, and yeah. All right, so now moving on, right here. So Tom mentioned that this was the first major blunder he did, where he left this pawn hanging, and we were cracking up. You guys gotta see our previous video where we're talking about how funny it is that I didn't capture it and what my logic was. I get scared of doing things like this because I just don't. I'm such a careful player. You know, I abuse the word positional in a wrong way because positional is not supposed to mean never capitalize on any blunders and don't take risks. It's supposed to mean you have a positional mindset instead of a tactical mindset. But this, no positional or tactical, I don't care what kind of player you are, if you don't take this, you're missing out on a huge opportunity. So what I did is I took a little bit of, I just took a little bit of a dive into what would have happened if I had taken that. So, sorry, I'm clicking away here. So if I took it, now again, if you look at the computer analysis, you'll see there's different moves that are the best moves in this. So Tom's best move was technically probably moving one of the bishops, like say moving this one here, or there's some weird stuff that, again, as a human, you may not see, you may. But what was my fear? My fear was this. So what was I afraid of? Let's look at okay, now I'm staring at my deepest fear in this. And what do I find? Well, hello, I get to be right in front of his king, totally safe. There's literally nothing that he can do to threaten my queen and push her back without weakening either his position or, you know, a combination of his position and like regressing in his development. So there is literally nothing to be afraid of for me doing that because, and you know, I explored also his better options. Either way, the computer engine said that it's still better for black. no matter how you look at it. Anything you want to add to that, Tom? I know it's kind of.
No, I think that's great.
Yeah, so it again, this is Luke addressing his fears, on candid camera. So I am gonna go to my next one, and it's a
You know,
similar.
I
Yeah,
think
go.
I think the idea of like really like exploring that fear, like I think that's a good takeaway for both of us. It's like let's dive into it. Let's actually see what I'm afraid of. What does that look like?
Yeah, and it's funny too because, and Tom, I know this is something I would like to do. Maybe we can start getting creative on this channel sometime and do some like visualization techniques where we'll take a position like, say this one, and then we'll ask each other like, okay, do you see 2 moves into this, 3 moves into this? Okay, where are all the pieces? That kind of thing. And
Yeah.
then because that kind of thing is really helpful when you're in a game, especially when you have a clock that you're looking at that's ticking. You have to be able to make those critical calculations and see things at least a couple moves ahead. And if you fail on that calculation, well, then it basically causes your position to be different than what you thought. So with that being said, let's take it to my next critical moment, which is right here. Okay, this is interesting. Now, at first glance, especially if any of you are around our, kind of level or lower, you'll look at this and instantly say, oh, for black, well, obviously you want to get your bishop out of there. Well, duh. Yes and no. I mean, yes, you do want to get your bishop out of there, generally speaking, but as we know, chess is not just generally speaking. Chess is situational. And in this case, there's a key element here that I think is really, and Tom, I don't know for you what your biggest takeaways have been with our master games we've looked at lately, but for me, I know I keep saying this on our videos, but order of operations, that for me is, I'm always astonished when I'm looking at our games, as we'll go through our one today, and just the order of operations is always so unique, and it's not what I think. So there's something called, now I can't remember what, I need to look it up, guys, but there's a German name for it. It's not Zugzwang, but it's another name, and it stands for an in-between move. Anyway, I'm just going to call it the English name, in-between move. Instead of moving my bishop back, what I should have done here, boom.
Mean.
So let's look at, again, let's explore, right? So this is what I didn't, it's funny too, because in this game, I did see it, but I didn't see where I could go from there. And I think that's another theme that we're pointing out is like, you got to kind of have an idea of where you're going to go from there.
And again, Benjamin Feingold, always look at checks and captures. There's your check there.
Yes. So here is this is a nice move because it's really easy to calculate. There's only one move Tom can do. So that's right here. Now, let me ask you this. If you were just someone watching this position right now and it's black's turn to move, what would you do? Because for me, I would think, oh, well, obviously here we go again. Obviously, I'm moving the bishop back. There's a better move in store. Now, keep in mind, his rooks are not connected. He's got a queen in between them. This bishop is I mean, he had a lot of action, but now that the king pawns have moved up, that action has basically been diminished quite extensively. Furthermore, when I do have my connected rooks, what I want to do is open a file right away. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And by me opening that up, I'm basically saying, okay, Tom, you can take my bishop. I have more in store where this has come from. And so what's going on here is I'm using my initiative, and I'm using the fact that my king or my queen is ideally placed. If I'm not going to utilize this, and what was the word you used earlier, Tom? Not utilize. Anyway, if I'm not going to capitalize
on it, gain the initiative.
Yeah, something like that. The point is, when your pieces are like this, you can't possibly like just overlook it and play normal solid chess. Like you got to go for something crazy because you're right there ready to do it. So if I move that piece, he can move his bishop here. I always have a check at my disposal. So let's just, just play around with this, shall we? So then we got, there's just a multitude of options. One thing I can do is There's like, the point is, I went down like 3 or 4 different variations after this point. I'm not going to go into them all now, but there's literally, I know it's hard to believe, and it was for me too. There's literally no way for white to stop the attack. There's, when all is said and done, as long as you're careful in your placement of your pieces, and it's really not that challenging. Like, it looks hard, even when I'm looking at it now, without thinking critically and taking some time, but it's not actually too bad. And the whole idea is the initiative was had. So, you know, and even with something like this, as you snatch up each of those pawns, there's no defenders. So the fact that I have less pieces on the board than Tom as far as minor pieces go is not really a problem. So anyway, there were like 3 or 4 different checkmates I discovered through that whole process. But I do want to take one step back and just say one more time, I didn't see what could have happened after I checked in with my queen. So right back, the reason why I didn't do this is a fair reason. I wasn't scared this time, but I didn't do this because I just thought, like, I don't know what'll happen after he moves here. I don't know what to do. And that's fair. That's fair. But I think one thing we should learn is taking risks is essential to your growth in chess. And you can take a risk by analyzing after a game, or you can take the risk in the game. And you could even lose from taking that risk. But after when all is said and done, if you've given it your best thoughts, and then you practice tactics and things later on that are specific to that type of situation, then there will come a game when that will happen and you will be able to see it. And so in the future, if I had encountered that again, you know what? I'm going to take it, because everything is pointing to that being a wise option, regardless of my hanging bishop. And if I had explored it, I wonder, you know, I might have been able to pull it off. The chess engine had no problem, but it always does. So, but I would say even expert or master, they would have no problem at all. I would have had problems, but I think I could have pulled it off. I think I could have pulled it off. So yeah, so that was my final critical moment. And it's kind of interesting too, because both those last 2 critical moments were learning how to essentially learning how to capitalize on various blunders, and they were both regarding that same square, which is kind of interesting. It was still an option later on, and it could have been a faster game. It's so funny. It was
like mine with the recapture of that center of that D pawn.
Exactly. So yeah, so in conclusion, for me, my biggest takeaways for this game, and there were many, but just to summarize, I would say opening theory. I would say just using simple logic to understand when you should castle versus pushing to open up the center, should be based, at least in part, upon how your opponent is developing their king side. So especially because I had a king side open before him, I should have just gone for it and opened or castled my, earlier on. Second takeaway was the punishing blunders. So when you notice your opponent has blundered, punish it right away, because you may only have 1 move window to do so. And in the case with the game, how it actually went, even though Tom made some mistakes in the attack, that pawn storm was scary. I mean, and if as we mentioned, earlier on, when he took this pawn and if he could have pushed it later on, that would have been devastating. I would have had to move my knight, and it would have obviously created the initiative Tom showed you guys earlier. Number 3 was order of operations. As I mentioned, it's important to always carefully calculate. Just because there's that one obvious move that you think, oh yeah, duh, maybe there's at least an in-between move that you should do, even if you're still going to do that move. And maybe when you do the in-between move, maybe you'll find that you actually don't even want to do that obvious move after, as in the case with my 4th critical move. And then finally, but not least, is when you have positional or tactical changes that occur in response to a threat, just be cognizant of what the board will look like after that threat is resolved. Because what I did in allowing Tom to have this battery was devastating. That could have been a solid win for him, and he would have have moved my queen around and pushed it away, taken the queen side and gone for an attack. And then, you know, additionally, when he had his knight over here, at that point, if he had taken my piece, if he realized that it would have enabled my position to be better by moving my queen there, he may not have done that. So that was, you know, so yeah, order of operations, you know, punishing blunders, opening theory of the castle dynamic, and then what does the board look like after the threats are resolved? And that's it for mine.
Cool. Well, I guess without further ado, then let's take a look at the master scheme that we looked at.
Absolutely. Probably should flip it.
Here we go. Okay, so found something that looks pretty similar to ours. Right. Starting off, should look
Here we
pretty
go.
similar.
Grandmaster game. Here we come. There is that that fear of doubled pawns. Now I'm doing what I wanted to do earlier.
Oops. This
Now,
is a mistake.
now I attack it. Yeah, that was a mistake. Because grandmasters make mistakes too, folks.
And then this is interesting, how the recapture takes place.
Yeah, this whole exchange was very, very interesting.
And so far, everything's about even, and then this happens.
This is a blunder.
And this would be super easy to overlook, honestly.
Because it looked good, like superficially.
Yeah, if you want to pause the video, it would have been a good spot to pause it to see where your move is. But that's your nasty attack of white.
Yep. And now from here on, it just kind of more and more and more solidifies white's position, having a massive advantage. And every threat, whatever they're worth, are all neutralized. Until we get to this point when the file is sealed up and black resigned. Earlier than we would ever resign in our games, but nevertheless, it was obvious that the white had the upper hand. But yeah, I love it how these Grandmaster games for me are really helping me to kind of place a really tangible context on elements that I want to know more about. So
definitely an interesting game. Kind of shows you how dynamic that position can be.
Yeah. So I mean, that's all I had planned. Anything else you want to say? Last words, Tom?
I don't think so. Thanks for following our channel and keep on practicing, guys.
Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next time. And until then, continue to improve your game.